Minho stood in the engine room of Station 47, his hands covered in grease that no other species could touch without suffering chemical burns. The coolant system had failed again, and the 3-meter-tall insectoid engineers, who normally managed the station, stood at a safe distance, watching him work. They didn't thank him. They never did. To them, he was just doing what humans did, fixing things that broke, maintaining systems that kept the galaxy running. The Galactic Assembly had stood for 12,000 years, a monument to cooperation among 847 different species. At least, that's what the official histories claimed. The truth was Messier. The assembly worked because everyone had a role. The Krathen dominated military strategy with their forearms and tactical brilliance. The Velusians controlled trade with their mathematical minds. The Korath held the council seats with their ancient psychic traditions. And humans? Humans fixed toilets, scrubbed floors, and kept the lights on. Hana knew this better than anyone. As Earth's ambassador to the Assembly, she had spent the last 8 years requesting the same thing over and over again: voting rights for humanity. Not special privileges, not extra representation, just a simple voice in the decisions that affected everyone. Each time, the request was denied. Each time, the council members looked through her as if she were made of glass. Today marked her 40th petition. She stood in the grand chamber, a space so vast that clouds sometimes formed near the ceiling. Around her, holographic projections of council members floated in attendant species from thousands of worlds, some appearing as geometric patterns, others as creatures that defied description. The human delegation consisted of 5 people. They looked tiny in comparison. The Terran delegation requests acknowledgement, Hana said, her voice steady despite knowing what would come next. A reptilian counselor, Veth of the Seraph Empire, glanced up from his data display for exactly 2 seconds. Petition denied. Next matter. You haven't heard our reasoning, Hana said. We don't need to, Veth replied, his forked tongue tasting the air dismissively. Humans lack the necessary qualifications for voting privileges. Your species demonstrates no significant military capability, no psychic aptitude, and your technology remains derivative of older civilizations. The matter is settled. Another counselor, a being of living crystal, added without emotion. Humans serve the assembly well in their current capacity. Why disturb a functional system? Hana felt the words of protest building in her throat. She wanted to list everything humans did. She wanted to explain how Jiho's medical fleets had saved 17 billion lives in the past decade alone. She wanted to describe how Nari's agricultural stations fed populations that would otherwise starve. She wanted to scream that humans maintained 73% of the faster-than-light transit lanes that made galactic civilization possible. Instead, she closed her datapad and said, "Thank you for your time." The other human delegates looked at her in surprise. Usually, Hana argued, she presented evidence. She fought for minutes or even hours before accepting defeat. But today, something in her expression had changed. She walked out of the chamber with her head high, and the rest of the delegation followed. Behind them, Veth made a comment to his neighboring counselor, intentionally loud enough for the humans to hear. Excellent servants, these humans. Very useful. It's important to keep them satisfied with their role. Laughter rippled through several delegations. The humans kept walking. Outside the chamber, a young delegate from a species Hana didn't recognize approached her. He had 4 eyes and spoke in a gentle, clicking voice. "Ambassador Hana, I wish to apologize for—" "Don't," Hana interrupted softly. "You're not responsible for their choices." She paused, then added, "But thank you." Back on Earth, in a simple office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Soong received Hana's encrypted report. He read it 3 times before standing and walking to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that humans had been appreciating for 200,000 years before they ever met another. Intelligent species. His communication console showed 47 urgent messages from human operations across the galaxy. Day from the mining guilds, Yuna from the communications network, Jiho from medical services, Era from education. All of them reporting the same pattern: dismissal, disrespect, casual cruelty disguised as humor. Seung sent the same reply to each of them: stand by. Something is coming. That night, he called a meeting of Earth's Leadership Council. It took place in a room that no alien had ever seen, beneath layers of security that humanity had quietly built over centuries. 30 people attended, representing every major human operation in the galaxy. The question is simple, Seung said. Do we stay or do we go? The debate lasted for hours. Some argued that humanity had a moral obligation to help species that depended on them. Others countered that staying enabled a system that treated humans as lesser beings. Some wanted to fight for change from within. Others pointed out that 400 years of effort had achieved nothing. Finally, Nari spoke. She was 93 years old and had spent her entire adult life growing food for aliens who barely acknowledged her existence. I've fed billions, she said quietly. I've never received a thank you. Not once. But more than that, I've watched those billions assume they're entitled to my labor. They don't see it as help. They see it as tribute from inferiors. She looked around the room. I think we should let them try feeding themselves for a while. The vote was scheduled for the following month. Every human in the galaxy would participate in a true referendum on whether to remain in the assembly or withdraw completely. Minho finished preparing Station 47's coolant system at 3 in the morning. Station time. The insectoid supervisor signed off on his work without comment. As Minho walked to his quarters, he checked his personal messages and saw the notification about the upcoming vote. He smiled for the first time in months. Across the galaxy, in hospitals and farms and power stations and maintenance tunnels and classrooms and laboratories, millions of humans received the same notification. They read it carefully. They thought about the small humiliations and casual dismissals they experienced every day. They thought about how the galaxy ran because of their efforts, and how little that seemed to matter to anyone else. And one by one, they began making their choice in the Grand Assembly Chamber. The next day's session proceeded as normal. Proposals were debated. Resources were allocated. Trade agreements were signed. No one noticed that the human delegation's seats remained empty. No one thought to ask why they would learn soon enough. The vote took 6 weeks to complete. Every human from Earth to the furthest colonial outpost cast their ballot through encrypted channels that Yuna's communications team had spent years preparing for this exact purpose. The aliens noticed nothing unusual. Humans had always maintained their own networks. It was one of the few things the assembly allowed them to do without supervision. When the results came in, Seung read them 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. 94% in favor of withdrawal. Only 6% wanted to remain in the assembly. The decision was clear, but Seung knew the next part would be harder. Leaving was one thing. Leaving without causing panic or interference was something else entirely. He sent out the first general order to all human operations. Begin transition protocols. You have 12 weeks. Day received the message while standing 2 kilometers underground on a mining asteroid in the Viridian system. His crew of 200 humans extracted rare elements that 40 different species needed for medical equipment, faster-than-light drives, and advanced computing systems. The elements existed nowhere else in sufficient quantities, and the mining process required working in temperatures that would liquefy most organic beings. His alien supervisor, a crystalline entity named Corvin, noticed Day reviewing some paperwork. "Something wrong?" Corvin asked, his voice like wind chimes. "No, just organizing our shift rotations," Day lied smoothly. "We're going to cross-train some of the newer workers on the extraction processes." Corvin seemed satisfied. "Good. Efficiency is important." What Corvin didn't know was that Day was preparing detailed transfer documents for every single operation on the asteroid. Lists of equipment, procedural manuals, safety protocols, everything an alien crew would need to continue the mining work after humans left. The manuals were written in clear, simple language, but they assumed the reader understood basic human engineering principles and chemistry. That was going to be a problem for whoever took over, but Day had stopped caring about solving other people's problems. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out in thousands of locations. Era began closing down human schools on alien worlds, quietly arranging for teachers and students to transfer back to human-controlled space. She told the local authorities it was a routine reorganization. They barely listened to Dachi, who faced a harder choice. His medical fleet was currently responding to a plague outbreak on the Outer Rim. 60 million people were infected, and the vaccine his teams had developed was the only effective treatment. The disease was similar to illnesses that humans had conquered centuries ago, but for the local species, it was deadly. He sent an encrypted message to Soong. "We have a moral obligation here. These people will die without our help." Soong's reply came within an hour. "Help them for the next 11 weeks. Then we leave whether the work is finished or not. That's all I can give you." Jiho accepted the compromise and pushed his teams to work faster than ever before. They vaccinated 40 million people in those 11 weeks. It wasn't enough, but it was all the time they had. Yuna's job was perhaps the most critical. She managed the communication blackouts that would prevent aliens from discovering the human exodus until it was too late to stop. She created false signals that made it look like human operations were continuing normally. She rerouted messages and altered data streams. It was delicate work that required perfect timing. "If we get this wrong," her assistant Taiwan told her, "they'll send military ships to intercept the colony vessels." "Then we won't get it wrong," Yuna replied calmly. The colony ships were Soong's responsibility. Humanity had built dozens of massive generation ships 400 years ago when they first joined the assembly. Most had been mothballed, deemed unnecessary, once faster-than-light travel became common. But humans never scrapped anything that might be useful someday. The ships had been maintained, kept in working order by small skeleton crews who rotated through multi-year assignments. Now those ships were being refurbished in secret. Soong coordinated with shipyard workers who took on extra shifts, telling their alien colleagues they were performing routine maintenance. Supplies were loaded. Routes were planned. Everything was prepared for a departure that would happen simultaneously across the entire galaxy. Minho received his assignment 8 weeks into the preparation period. He was to be the last human to leave Station 47, which meant he had to train his replacement. The assembly sent a young Krathan engineer named Dravik, eager and confident. "I've studied human engineering for 3 years," Dravik announced proudly, his forearms gesticulating enthusiastically. "I'm certain I can handle these systems." Minho spent 2 weeks showing Dravik everything about the station's coolant system, power distribution, life support, and the 17 other critical systems that humans maintained. Dravik took notes constantly, but kept making the same mistake. He thought he understood the principles when he only understood the procedures. "Why do you recalibrate the coolant flow every 48 hours? Dravik asked. "Because the system drifts," Minho explained. "But why does it drift?" "Because of the interaction between the primary cooling agent and the secondary heat exchange medium. They're not perfectly compatible, so there's degradation over time." Dravik nodded as if he understood, but Minho could see the confusion in his eyes. The young Krathen had memorized steps without grasping the underlying chemistry. When something went wrong, and something always went wrong eventually, Dravik wouldn't know how to adapt. Minho wrote everything down anyway. He created the most detailed manual he could. Then he submitted his resignation, citing family reasons. The station supervisor accepted it without comment. 2 weeks before the final departure date, Hana prepared the last message Earth would send to the Galactic Assembly. She wrote 17 different versions before settling on the simplest one. No accusations. No bitterness. Just 2 words that said everything that needed to be said. She scheduled the message to transmit simultaneously to all 847 member species at the exact moment the last human would cross back into Sol system space. The final week arrived. Across the galaxy, humans began their journeys home. They left their posts in hospitals and schools and farms and power stations. They handed over their duties to alien replacements who accepted the transfers with casual indifference. Most aliens barely noticed. Humans had always been quiet and efficient. Their absence hadn't registered yet. Shiho's medical fleet finished their last vaccination run and turned toward Earth. 20 million people on the Outer Rim were still sick, but the vaccines and treatment protocols had been left behind. The local authorities would have to handle the rest themselves. Nari watched as the last harvest was completed on Agricultural Station 12. The station grew enough food to feed 4 billion people on 3 different worlds. She left detailed instructions on crop rotation, pest management, and nutrient supplementation. Whether anyone would follow those instructions was no longer her concern. On the departure day, Soong stood in the command center of Earth's largest colony ship, monitoring reports from across the galaxy. Green lights appeared on his display one by one as each human operation confirmed evacuation complete. The last green light came from Minho on Station 47. All personnel accounted for. Soong announced to the crew, "Take us home." The colony ships and faster-than-light vessels all converged on a single point, a spatial anomaly near Sol that humanity had been studying for decades. The assembly knew about the anomaly, but considered it useless, a navigational hazard to avoid. What they didn't know was that humans had learned to read its patterns, to find the safe paths through its shifting gravitational fields. The first ship entered the anomaly and disappeared from all sensors. Then another, and another. Thousands of ships carrying millions of humans, all vanishing into a region of space that the assembly couldn't penetrate. At the exact moment the last human ship crossed the threshold, Hana's message transmitted across the galaxy. It appeared on every official communication channel, in every council chamber, on every diplomatic frequency. 2 words: farewell, goodbye, and then silence. Counselor Veth stared at the message for a full minute before laughing. The sound echoed through the Grand Assembly chamber, where an emergency session had been called within hours of humanity's departure. Representatives from hundreds of worlds crowded the space, their holographic forms flickering with various expressions of confusion and annoyance. "They left," Veth announced, still amused. "The humans actually left." How dramatic. A Velusian trade minister spoke up, her mathematical mind already calculating implications. "They've abandoned their contracts. This is a significant breach of economic agreements." "Let them breach," another counselor said dismissively. "They'll be back within a month, begging for their positions." Humans have always depended on the assembly for resources and protection. A few voices murmured agreement, but one delegate stood and requested recognition. Kalen was young for a counselor, representing a minor species that most others barely acknowledged. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he spoke. "With respect, I believe we're making a mistake by not taking this seriously. I've worked alongside humans for years, They don't make empty gestures. Veth waved a clawed hand dismissively. You're young, Kalen. You don't understand galactic politics. Humans are making a statement because we hurt their feelings. They'll realize soon enough that isolation is impossible in the modern galaxy. But what if they don't come back? Kalen pressed. What if? Then we'll hire other species to do their work, Veth interrupted. The galaxy didn't stop turning before humans arrived. It won't stop now that they've left. He looked around the chamber. I move that we take no action on this matter. Let the humans sulk in their home system. When they're ready to be reasonable, we'll consider accepting them back. The motion passed easily. The session adjourned. Most counselors returned to their worlds, thinking about more important matters. A few thousand humans leaving the galaxy barely registered as newsworthy. Dravik discovered the first problem on his third day as chief engineer of Station 47. The coolant system's pressure readings were climbing, but all the automated alerts said everything was normal. He checked Menho's manual and found the procedure for pressure adjustment. He followed it exactly. The pressure continued climbing. Dravik checked the manual again, reading more carefully. There was a note. If standard adjustment fails, check secondary heat exchange for contamination and adjust coolant mixture accordingly. He didn't know what contamination looked like or how to adjust the mixture. That information was probably in the manual somewhere. But the manual was 3,000 pages long and assumed the reader understood human chemistry notation. He called for help from the Central Engineering Office. They sent a Velusian specialist who looked at the system and admitted, I've never worked with human-designed systems before. The principles are different from our standard engineering. Can you figure it out? Dravik asked, trying to keep the panic from his voice. Given enough time, certainly. How long until the pressure reaches critical levels? Dravik checked his instruments. Maybe 6 hours. They didn't figure it out in time. The coolant system exploded, venting toxic gas through 3 levels of the station. 24 people were injured. The station had to be evacuated for emergency repairs that took 2 weeks and cost more than the assembly had spent on maintenance in the previous 5 years. It was a small incident, barely noticed by anyone outside the station itself. But it was the first crack in a system that had seemed solid. The second crack appeared at the Nexus Gate, the most important faster-than-light transit hub in the galaxy. Gina had been the last human station master there, managing the complex calculations that kept thousands of ships moving safely through compressed space every day. She had left behind her procedures, her algorithms, and her notes. What she hadn't left behind was the intuition that came from doing the work for 20 years. She could sense when traffic patterns were creating dangerous resonances. She could feel when the gate's energy fields were drifting out of alignment. Her replacement, a highly educated Koroth with psychic abilities that should have made the job easier, didn't have that intuition. On the 43rd day after humanity's departure, the Nexus Gate collapsed during a routine transit. 17 ships were caught in the subspace rupture. There were no survivors. 3,000 people died in an instant. The investigation revealed that the gate had been drifting out of calibration for weeks, but the new station master hadn't noticed. The automated systems that should have caught the problem had been designed by humans and contained assumptions that non-human engineers didn't share. Why didn't the safety alerts trigger? The investigator asked. They did, the station master replied, confused. But the human documentation says to ignore Type 7 alerts, unless accompanied by Type 3 warnings. I followed the procedure exactly. Did you understand what Type 7 and Type 3 alerts actually measure? Long silence. I thought I did? By the 3rd month, reports were flooding into the assembly. Power stations failing. Agricultural systems breaking down. Medical equipment malfunctioning. Transit lanes becoming unstable. Each incident was small on its own. Together, they represented something much larger in the outer rim. The plague that Jiho's teams had been fighting exploded back to full strength. 20 million vaccinated people were safe, but the remaining 40 million had no protection. The local medical authorities tried to manufacture more vaccine using the human protocols, but they couldn't replicate the process. Something in the human documentation assumed knowledge that they simply didn't have. The death toll climbed past 5 million within weeks. Nari's agricultural stations began failing one by one. The automated systems broke down, and the alien workers who took over didn't understand the delicate balance of nutrients and growing conditions that humans had maintained. Crops died. Storage facilities malfunctioned. Food shipments stopped arriving. 6 different species that depended on those stations for 70% of their food supply suddenly faced famine. Counselor Veth called another emergency session at the 6-month mark. The mood had changed significantly. The chamber was quieter now, the earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. "We need to send a message to Earth," a Velusian counselor said. "Offer them incentives to return. Higher pay, better quarters, whatever they want." "We should send a military fleet," Veth countered, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "Force them to honor their obligations." Kalen stood again. "With respect, neither of those approaches will work. The humans didn't leave because of pay or living conditions. They left because we treated them like servants instead of equals. So what do you suggest?" Veth snapped. "I suggest we try to understand what we've lost," Kalen replied quietly. "I worked with human engineers for 5 years. I thought I understood what they did, but I'm realizing now that I only saw the surface. They weren't just fixing things and following procedures. They were holding together systems that we designed poorly, compensating for our mistakes, solving problems we didn't even know existed." Another counselor interrupted. "Surely we can hire other species to replace them." "We've been trying that for 6 months," Kalen said. "It's not working. The humans didn't just know how to do these jobs. They redesigned our entire infrastructure over centuries to make it actually function. We've been living in a galaxy shaped by human ingenuity, and we never even noticed." The debate continued for hours, but no consensus emerged. Finally, they voted to send a diplomatic mission to the spatial anomaly near Sol. A fleet of ships arrived at the location where the last human vessels had disappeared. They found nothing. Their sensors showed only empty space. They tried every scanning technology available. They sent probes. They broadcast messages on every frequency. Nothing came back. It was as if humanity had simply ceased to exist. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galactic economy had contracted by 40%. Minho sat in a comfortable chair on Earth, reading the intercepted reports with a mixture of sadness and vindication. The monitoring station that Yuna's team maintained could still listen to assembly communications. Even if the assembly couldn't reach back, the reports painted a grim picture. The Nexus Gate disaster had been just the beginning. 12 more major transit hubs had suffered catastrophic failures. Entire sectors of the galaxy were now isolated from each other, cut off from trade and communication. Species that had relied on easy, faster-than-light travel for thousands of years suddenly found themselves alone. The power grid failures were worse. Humans had maintained a network of energy transfer stations that allowed power-rich systems to supply power-poor ones. The network had grown organically over centuries, with human engineers constantly adjusting and rebalancing the load. When the humans left, the automated systems tried to maintain the balance, but they couldn't adapt to changing conditions. Cascading failures began in the outer sectors and spread inward like a disease. Entire worlds went dark. Technological civilizations that had enjoyed unlimited energy for millennia suddenly found themselves rationing power. Some planets managed to build local generation facilities. Others descended into chaos. On Earth, Soong received weekly reports from the monitoring teams. He read each one carefully, looking for signs of what the assembly might do next. After the first year, a pattern emerged that troubled him. "They're fighting each other," he told the Leadership Council during their monthly meeting. 70 species have descended into civil war. Resource conflicts mostly. When there was plenty for everyone, they cooperated. Now that there's scarcity, old rivalries are resurface. Hannah closed her eyes briefly. How many dead? 18 billion at last count. The number climbs every day. Ji-Ho spoke up from his position at the table. The plague in the Outer Rim has spread to 200 worlds now. They never figured out how to manufacture the vaccine. The death toll there alone is approaching 3 billion. Silence filled the room. Finally, Nari asked the question they were all thinking. Should we help them? No, Soong said firmly. We left for a reason. If we go back now, nothing will change. They'll see us as saviors for a few years, then go right back to treating us like servants once the crisis passes. But billions are dying, Nari pressed. Billions died before when we were there, Minot interjected quietly. We saved as many as we could, and they never even said thank you. They thought it was our obligation, our place in the natural order. He looked around the table. I'm sorry for the suffering, but it's not our responsibility to fix problems we didn't create. Hannah nodded slowly. Minho's right. We tried for 400 years to make them see us as equals. They refused. What's happening now is the consequence of their own choices. The vote was taken. Earth would maintain its isolation. Meanwhile, the assembly continued to deteriorate. Councillor Veth had lost most of his political power. His home system was one of those suffering from power grid failure, and his constituents blamed him for the crisis. He had been the loudest voice mocking humanity. Now he was a cautionary tale. Kalen had risen to become senior counselor, leading a coalition of species that understood how badly they had miscalculated. He spent his days trying to hold the assembly together, mediating disputes and organizing resource-sharing agreements. It was exhausting work that he had no training for. He called another meeting at the anomaly near Seoul. This time, the message was different. People of Earth, he broadcast. We understand now what we failed to see before. You weren't just workers in our civilization. You were the foundation that everything else rested on. We took you for granted. We disrespected you. We treated you as lesser beings when you were keeping us all alive. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We are asking, begging for your help. Not as servants, as equals. Full voting rights in the assembly. Equal representation. Equal voice in all decisions. Whatever you need, we will provide. Please. Billions are dying. Our civilization is collapsing. We were wrong about everything. The message repeated for 3 months. Every day, the same plea, broadcast on every frequency they could manage. On Earth, the Leadership Council listened to each broadcast. They debated long into the night about how to respond. They're offering everything we asked for, Hera pointed out. Equal status. Voting rights. True partnership. Now, Soong emphasized. They're offering it now, when they're desperate. What happens in 20 years, when things are stable again? Will they remember this lesson, or will we slowly drift back to being second-class citizens? Ji-Ho struggled with the medical ethics of the situation. I became a doctor to save lives. Listening to reports of plagues and medical crises while doing nothing, it goes against everything I believe in. You saved lives for 40 years, Hannah reminded him gently. You treated patients who never learned your name. You taught alien doctors who looked down on you even as they learned from you. You gave everything you had, and they took it as their right. She met his eyes. You don't owe them more than you already gave. The debates continued for weeks. Some argued for conditional assistance help in exchange for guaranteed reforms. Others wanted complete isolation until the assembly proved it had truly changed. A few advocated for permanent separation, arguing that humanity was better off alone. In the end, they decided to send one message in response. Sung drafted it himself, revising it dozens of times before he was satisfied. The message read, "We left because you taught us we were worthless. You are now learning what we were worth. This is not cruelty. This is education. When you have rebuilt your civilization on principles of mutual respect, when you have learned to maintain your own systems, feed your own people, and solve your own problems, contact us again. We will be waiting. But we will never again be servants. Respectfully, humanity." The message was transmitted once and never repeated. 2 years after the departure, the assembly had fractured into regional groups. The central authority barely existed anymore. 300 species had gone extinct, unable to adapt to the new reality of scarcity and isolation. Hundreds more had regressed to pre-spaceflight technology levels, but something else was happening too. The species that survived were learning. They were teaching each other skills they had once outsourced. The Krafen, who had focused purely on military matters, were learning engineering. The Velusians were studying agriculture. The Korath were developing practical maintenance skills instead of relying purely on psychic abilities. It was slow progress, painful and costly. But it was progress. Kalen worked 18-hour days trying to coordinate the recovery efforts. He established new communication networks to replace the ones that had failed. He organized knowledge-sharing programs between species. He helped negotiate peace treaties in conflicts that had erupted over resources. One day, while reviewing reports, in his office, he came across a technical manual that humans had left behind. It was for a basic water purification system, written in simple language. For the first time, reading through the procedures, he actually understood not just what to do, but why it worked. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. He sent a brief report toward the Soul Anomaly, not expecting a response. We're learning, slowly, but we're learning. On Earth, monitoring stations picked up the message. It was filed with thousands of others. No response was sent. Humanity continued to watch and wait. 5 years had passed since the last human ship disappeared into the anomaly near Sol. Kalen stood in what remained of the Grand Assembly chamber, looking at the empty seats where hundreds of delegations once sat. Now barely 200 species maintained regular attendance. The chamber felt haunted by ghosts of better days. He was preparing for the quarterly status report, a ritual he had established to track the slow recovery. The numbers were still grim, but the trend had finally reversed. Deaths were declining. Food production was increasing. Some of the damaged infrastructure was being repaired, though it took 10 times longer than it would have with human help. Counselor Veth entered the chamber, walking slowly. He had aged badly in 5 years. His scales had lost their shine, and his voice no longer carried the arrogant confidence it once had. He had asked for this private meeting. "I wanted to apologize," Veth said quietly, settling into a seat designed for a much larger species. "Not to the humans. They'll never hear it. But to you, Kalen. You warned us, and I laughed at you." Kalen sat across from him. "I was just as blind. I worked with humans for years and never really saw them. I thought I was better than you because I was polite to them, but I still didn't value them properly. I didn't fight for them when it mattered." "What do you think they're doing now?" Veth asked. "In there, behind that barrier we can't cross?" "Thriving, probably," Kalen said. "All those resources they spent maintaining our infrastructure, they're using them for themselves now. All that knowledge they accumulated, they're advancing it further. They're probably decades ahead of us technologically by now. Veth made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. We had access to the most adaptable, innovative species in the galaxy, and we wasted them on maintenance work. What were we thinking? We were thinking in hierarchies, Kalen replied. Strong versus weak. Advanced versus primitive. We measured value in all the wrong ways. The conversation was interrupted by an aide rushing in. Counselor Kalen, there's news from the Viridian mining system. They've successfully extracted rare elements for the first time since the humans left. Kalen felt a small spark of hope. How long did it take them? 5 years to figure out the process, the aide reported. The yield is only 30% of what humans achieved, and it cost 4 times as much, but it's a start. After the aide left, Veth shook his head. 30% yield. The humans made it look so easy that we never appreciated how difficult it actually was. Everything they did was like that, Kalen said. I've been reviewing the old records. Do you know how many technical innovations humans contributed to the assembly? Thousands. And because they were usually incremental improvements rather than flashy new inventions, we barely noticed. We thought they were just maintaining our technology when they were actually constantly improving it. Veth stood to leave, then paused. Do you think they'll ever come back? I don't know, Kalen admitted. But I know we don't deserve them back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. On Earth, life had transformed in ways that surprised even the humans themselves. Freed from the obligation to maintain someone else's civilization, human creativity and energy had turned inward. Technological advancement that had been incremental for centuries suddenly accelerated. Minho worked in a research facility developing new forms of faster-than-light travel that didn't rely on the gate system. Without the need to maintain compatibility with assembly technology, human engineers could explore radical new approaches. They had made breakthroughs that would have been impossible while constrained by the old infrastructure. Nari had expanded agricultural research in ways she had only dreamed about before, with resources that once fed alien populations now available for human use. Earth and its colonies enjoyed abundance that previous generations would have found shocking. But more importantly, freed from the pressure of feeding billions of aliens. She could focus on sustainability and quality rather than just maximum yield. Jiho had returned to teaching, training a new generation of doctors in techniques that combined human medical knowledge with innovations developed during the isolation period. Medical technology had leaped forward. Diseases that had plagued humanity for millennia were now treatable or eliminated entirely. The population had grown too, with optimism about the future replacing the quiet resignation of the assembly years. More families chose to have children. Earth cities hummed with energy and life, but the monitoring stations still listened to the galaxy beyond. Reports came in daily, tracking the assembly's slow recovery. The Leadership Council reviewed them carefully, looking for signs of real change. They're learning to cooperate better, Hana reported at the council meeting. Species that never worked together before are sharing knowledge. The crisis forced them to break down some of their old prejudices. Some, Sung emphasized, but the hierarchy still exists. They just reshuffled who's on top. Era added, their education systems are changing, though. I've been monitoring their academic broadcasts. They're teaching cooperation and practical skills instead of just focusing on military strength and psychic ability. It's a cultural shift that will take generations to fully manifest, but it's starting. The question they faced now was the same, one they had debated for 5 years. When, if ever, should humanity re-establish contact? We could help them, Geo said, making the argument he had made countless times before. Not as servants, as equals. We have knowledge that could save millions of lives. And if we help them, what's to stop them from becoming dependent on us again? Sung countered. We'd just be enabling the same dynamic that caused the problem in the first place. Yuna spoke up. I've been analyzing their communication patterns. There's a generational change happening. The leaders who dismissed us are dying off or losing power. The younger generation never knew the galaxy before the collapse. They're building something different. Different doesn't necessarily mean better, Minho warned. Different just means different. Nari, who usually stayed quiet during these debates, said something that surprised everyone. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. We keep asking when we should go back. But why should we go back at all? We're happy here. We're prospering. We've built something good. Why risk it? The room fell silent as everyone considered this. Finally, Hannah spoke. Because isolation was never the goal. It was a consequence, a necessary step. We left to teach them a lesson, not to abandon galactic civilization forever. The question isn't whether we should eventually re-engage. The question is what conditions need to be met first. They spent the next 3 months developing criteria. The assembly would need to demonstrate sustained cooperation for at least a decade. They would need to solve major infrastructure problems on their own, proving they could maintain their own civilization. They would need to establish systems of governance that valued all species equally, not just the militarily or psychically powerful. And critically, they would need to ask for partnership, not help, not charity, not rescue. Partnership. 10 years after humanity's departure, the monitoring stations detected something new. The assembly had rebuilt enough infrastructure to organize a major gathering. Delegates from every surviving species convened to ratify a new charter. The charter was remarkable. It established equal voting rights for all species, regardless of military strength or technological advancement. It created councils dedicated to education, mutual aid, and knowledge sharing. It banned the kind of hierarchical thinking that had characterized the old assembly. Kalen had drafted it personally, drawing inspiration from human governance models he had found in old records. He didn't copy them exactly. What worked for humans wouldn't necessarily work for such a diverse group of species, but he borrowed the underlying principles of equality and mutual respect. The ratification passed unanimously. 3 months later, a small ship approached the anomaly near Sol. It carried Kalen and a delegation of 5 species, carefully chosen to represent the new assembly's diversity. They broadcast a simple message. People of Earth, we have spent 10 years learning to survive without you. We have failed more than we have succeeded. We have lost billions of lives to our own arrogance and incompetence. But we have learned. We are not the same civilization that dismissed your petitions and mocked your worth. We do not ask you to return as our saviors. We do not ask you to fix our problems. We ask only for the opportunity to meet as equals and explore whether we might build something better together. If you choose to remain separate, we will respect that decision and leave you in peace. The choice is yours. On Earth, the Leadership Council listened to the broadcast. They had been expecting something like this, but hearing the actual words still created a complex mix of emotions. They debated for 2 weeks. In the end, they decided to respond, but not with ships or delegations. Not yet. SEUNG transmitted a message back through the anomaly. Your message has been received. We acknowledge the changes you have made. We see the effort you have put into rebuilding. But words are easy, and even good intentions can fade. Continue on your current path. Prove that these changes are permanent, not just desperate measures during a crisis. In another 10 years, if your new principles still guide you, contact us again. We will consider a meeting then. Until that time, we wish you well. Kalen received the message with mixed emotions. 10 more years of waiting, but also hope, real hope, that humanity might eventually return. He broadcast the message throughout the assembly. The response was thoughtful rather than angry. The younger generation understood. They had grown up in a galaxy shaped by humanity's absence. They knew that trust had to be earned. The work continued. The assembly rebuilt, reformed, and slowly grew stronger. On Earth, humanity watched and waited. The anomaly shimmered between them and the galaxy beyond, a barrier that was also a promise. Someday, perhaps, it would open again, but only on humanity's terms. Only as equals. Or not at all. The choice had been made, and humanity would not walk it back. They had learned their worth. The galaxy had learned it too, the hard way, and both were better for the lesson, painful as it had been.